September 15th, Wednesday, 17:35 hours. Operation Pole Vault is underway. The tactical scenario has been written, the contingencies considered, and orders relayed to the various commands. A major military exercise is a logistical and communications challenge. Timing, coordination, and mobility is crucial. The engineers of 2CER must have the bridge in place by 2200 hours. The supply convoy will cross at 2330. Dust obscures vision. Long hours at the wheel are uncomfortable. The Recce Patrol has successfully penetrated enemy territory. Pole vault is progressing as planned. Every soldier knows that a situation may arise where many lives, both military and civilian, will depend on their response to a crisis. Across the forces, the level of training, fitness, and readiness is very high. But these men are human. Under prolonged stress, extended hours, lack of sleep, difficult conditions, inevitably fatigue sets in. Driving is tedious. The tactical scenario requires the commands to make decisions and react to a changing situation. Even in the most carefully planned exercise, the situation can change in unforeseen ways.
Go ahead.
You must take charge of the situation. Immediately begin to organize your approach. Direct the other vehicle to provide light. Do not be distracted by casualties until you can assess hazards. Are there downed electrical wires? Can you smell spilled fuel? Your first priority is to make the area safe. Turn off the ignition. Use an extinguisher to prevent explosion or fire.
God, get over here, quick!
Organize your first aid team. Be clear. Each rescuer should be directed to assess a specific casualty. You cannot determine the priorities of first aid until you know the nature of the injuries. Triage means deciding which casualties and which injuries to treat first.
What do you got? Sergeant, I got a bleeder. Looks like a possible second chest wound.
To help you triage the casualties, request reports from each rescuer. Listen carefully.
Pino, what do you got?
Direct someone to assess available first aid supplies. You will need the radio to call for help. This casualty, Sergeant Martin, is conscious. Shock is already present. However, he is able to respond to your questions, and his injuries do not appear to be immediately life-threatening. Sergeant Martin is not a priority. In accident scene management, the person with the most first aid experience will always take charge. Remember that arranging for help is just as important as any first aid you will perform. There is an urgent need for medical attention. The sooner these casualties can be evacuated, the better their chances for full recovery. From the rescuers' reports, you know that all casualties in the immediate area are conscious and breathing. But you do have some severe, possibly life-threatening injuries. This casualty, with a sucking chest wound, seems to be your most serious injury. Have someone apply direct pressure. Do not waste time trying to move him. The chest wound which threatens respiration must be treated immediately. Use the airtight outer wrapper of a field dressing to seal the wound. Tape it securely in place. This casualty, Corporal Miller, is lying in a pool of spilled fuel. Because of suspected neck injuries, you cannot move him until he is stabilized. Make his immediate area safe. Irrigate his eyes and face with fresh water and cover the fuel with dirt or sand. Then you can proceed with first aid. Begin with a thorough examination. The chief first aider must stay on top of the situation. He will continue to direct the efforts of his team. He will monitor the progress of first aid being given. He must keep a clear mental picture of the injuries on each casualty. The examination confirms a neck or spinal injury. Corporal Miller must not be moved until he is fully immobilized. First, apply a cervical collar. Corporal Dibley is still in the truck. He is badly shaken up and has a fracture of the lower leg. Splint the leg before attempting to move him. An important part of accident scene management is recruiting help. In this situation, all the rescuers are qualified first aiders, but when you are short-handed, you can even recruit help from another casualty. In fact, in this case, it is good casualty management to keep Sergeant Martin focused. He can assist by applying pressure over the wound. Note that Corporal Miller is being immobilized in the position of injury. The first aider must not risk further damage by turning him over. Splint the wrist, but take care not to put pressure at the site of the fracture. Once the sucking chest wound has been sealed by an airtight dressing, do a more complete examination to determine other injuries. Start with the head and probe gently along the neck and spine and along all four limbs. He will respond to pain. There is a fracture. The injury is extremely painful. He must now be moved so that you have room to work. This casualty has minor cuts and abrasions. There is no risk of further injury. He is in a safe area and fairly comfortable. Dress the head wound. A field dressing will apply pressure over the wound and will help control bleeding. Use a drag carry to move the casualty. Support the head and neck and grip the clothing as you drag him from the vehicle. As time passes, the condition of some casualties may deteriorate. Help Sergeant Martin to lie down. There are no obvious external injuries. Unknown to first aid team, Sergeant Martin had been experiencing recurrent chest pain, but he has denied symptoms. Therefore, the only possible first aid is to elevate his feet to help control shock. Begin to assemble the casualties in one safe area. It is more convenient and more efficient to have them together. It is your responsibility to ensure that all casualties have been located. Direct someone to search for Private LeBlanc. There are many details to consider. The casualty with the chest wound will be able to breathe more easily if he is inclined to the injured side. The first aider has found Private LeBlanc. He is unconscious and breathing. He has a pulse, but his leg is bleeding badly. In first aid, you will always deal first with stop breathing, then bleeding, unconsciousness, and all other injuries. First, control bleeding. Use your common sense in making a further assessment. Events suggest a possible neck injury. The private was thrown from the truck. Immobilize the neck with an improvised cervical collar. If possible, have someone steady and support the head.
Good. I'm going to need some help up here with, to get him down. Okay? Okay, you're stable with me? You're calling? Yeah. Okay, call if you have any problems. Yeah, okay.
You will need help to move Corporal Dibley from the truck.
Okay, we're going to move you up now, okay?
Remember to lift with your legs, not your back. The fracture has been immobilized by using the good leg as a splint. Padding was placed between the legs and the ankles secured together with a figure 8 bandage. Triangular bandages have been tied above and below the fracture. Once you have located all casualties and dealt with immediate life-threatening injuries, you have a complete picture of the situation. However, your responsibilities do not end.
Okay. You need blankets. Go get blankets, okay? You'll be fine, okay? Just relax, okay?
An accident situation like this is even more complicated because of the time lag in the arrival of help. There is a lack of water and supplies. Cold and damp will aggravate conditions. Shock has been slowed by first aid, but it will increase as time passes. Cover the casualties. The confusion immediately following the accident is gradually being replaced with order. The casualties are more comfortable. The first aid team is in control. The first aiders have improvised a stretcher from blankets to carry Private LeBlanc.
Watch out for him there.
He is still unconscious. There is a probability that he will gag or vomit. To maintain an open airway and to reduce the risk of choking, they put him in the recovery position.
Too tight? Loosen it up. Just tell me, right? Just don't move it. No, I'm not going to move it. Okay, one more. Oh.
Continue to monitor breathing and pulse. Perform secondary examinations and continue secondary first aid. Assess the tightness of bandages. Talk to the casualties. Ask them to describe any feelings of dizziness or nausea.
Okay, you doing okay? Yeah.
Continue to observe closely and be prepared to adapt to changing priorities. His injuries are serious, but no longer life-threatening. The important thing is to prevent further injury. Take your time.
Hey, wait. Sergeant, stop breathing. Sergeant.
The priorities have shifted again. Sergeant Martin has suddenly collapsed.
Sergeant.
Once you have determined no responsiveness, no breathing, and no pulse, notify the chief first aider and begin CPR.
Sergeant, stop breathing. It's not a heart attack.
The sergeant's condition had been worsening. The early stages of an impending heart attack can mimic simple shock. He is now clearly in cardiac arrest. There may also be internal injuries that you still cannot assess. Be aware that he may not spontaneously regain breathing and pulse, but you are sustaining life until he can be handed over to medical aid. Stay with him and continue CPR. 2 trained rescuers would perform 2-man CPR. Do not attempt moving Corporal Miller without 1 or 2 assistants. Remember that the spine must be fully supported during any movement. Your main job now is to continue to monitor each casualty. Be prepared to report on the time of the accident, the names of the casualties, the nature of their injuries, and the first aid given. Accident scene management is a matter of determining priorities and making judgments. Use your first aid skills and your common sense. Take charge of the situation. Survey the scene and assess hazards. Make the area safe for yourself and others. Organize bystanders. Alert emergency services.
I found him!
Locate all casualties. So long as there is no immediate risk of further injury, do not move casualties until they are stable.
Breathing, though.
Assess injuries. Deal with the most serious injuries first. Monitor casualties. Keep them warm. Shock will increase with time. Be prepared to adapt to changing priorities. Hand over to medical aid. There has been a great deal of first aid in this accident. Let's briefly review how the first aid team dealt with each casualty. Note that in each case, the priorities are breathing, bleeding, consciousness, and then all other injuries. Sergeant Martin. At first he seems shocky, no obvious injuries. But his condition worsens.
I need help.
Help him to lie down. Elevate the feet. Following cardiac arrest, breathing becomes the priority, and the first aider initiates CPR.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Corporal Pedersen. Breathing is threatened. Seal the sucking chest wound. A secondary examination confirms a fracture. Move him to provide room to work. Incline him to the injured side to help him breathe more easily. Splint the fracture. Corporal Miller. Make the area safe. Irrigate his face and cover the spilled fuel with dirt. Confirm neck and spinal injuries. Apply a cervical collar.
Try not to move your head at all.
Splint the fracture. Do not move him until he is fully immobilized on a spine board. Corporal Dibley. Assess injuries. Splint the fracture before moving him. Cover him to slow shock. Private Kowalski. Dress the head wound. Cover him and keep warm. Private LeBlanc. Assess breathing and pulse.
He's unconscious. He's breathing, though.
Dress the bleeding wound. Immobilize the neck with an improvised cervical collar. Place an unconscious casualty in the recovery position.
Get over here, quick, get over here.
Your understanding of the priority action approach,
Quick over there, Vito, check
your control of the situation, and your ability to make judgments and assess priorities can do much to preserve life, prevent further injury, and to promote recovery.